Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today I have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Julie Fratantoni, and she is a neuroscientist and works at, I forget exactly what university, but it's in Austin. And
Uh, UT Dallas.
okay, that's right. That's
Mhm.
right. And like, I see what she does on the Instagram, and it's like all these interesting like life hacks that tie into like neuroscience, like gratitude or sleep or memory. And I found it truly interesting, and I happened to reach out, and she was willing to come on, so I'm very thankful. So thanks for coming on, Julie.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
And I saw on one podcast that you did, this guy was saying, you must be really smart because you have a PhD. And you were like, I don't even know if it's about smarts. It's more about like the curiosity and the drive to learn. And I was going to ask, where do you get that drive? When did you notice that you had a drive to learn about the brain or just about learning in general?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think most, I would say all children are kind of innately have this curiosity about the world, right? You know, if you would know anyone that has a toddler and they go through that phase where they're just asking why, and it actually becomes annoying. But that's the brain in development and its desire to just kind of understand, to figure out patterns, to put information together, to just make sense of the world. And so I think we all kind of start that way, right? We start curious. As we get into adulthood, we can kind of become stale, right? Or we're like, oh, I know how this goes, or I'm just in this autopilot routine. So we sort of have to actively fight against that. But I would say, both of my parents are psychologists, and they also are just lifelong learners and very curious people. So I think they modeled that for me. So they were always kind of, asking questions of like, oh, why do you think this is this way? Or, we didn't always have the answers, but I think they kind of helped to show me just how to do that. And part of what you learn when you get a PhD, or at least in the program I was in, is that it was more about asking questions and asking better questions. And you do the experiment to then figure out what is the next question, as opposed to just, oh, we just want to find this answer, or we want to prove this thing right. So I think there's a sense of, anyway, just openness there that that has to be cultivated to keep that as an adult.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And what specific department or what was your specific field of study? Did you have any like specialty or like pointed direction?
So I always share this because I have a lot of students that are like, I'm interested in neuroscience and I want to get my PhD, or I want to do this or that. And I'm always like, that's awesome. You know more than I did when I was in your position. I started out, my undergrad and my master's were both actually in speech language pathology. So for anyone who's not familiar with that field, that field can work with a variety of populations, from infants all the way up to geriatric. You can be in schools, hospitals, private practice. There's a really big variety. I personally got really interested in working with adults that had brain injury or stroke. So the medical side of that, which is very neuro. So that's kind of how I got into the brain. But in like hindsight is 2020. So in looking back, I can see, oh, here's the clear story of how I landed where I am now. But at the time, I thought I just wanted to work clinically. My dream job was to be in a hospital and do rehab. And it's funny because it didn't work out that way. I ended up deciding, I was like, I had always been involved in research. So I was like, all right, let's give this a try. Maybe I'll get my PhD. And I really was curious to better understand how the brain works. Just because even when we are treating brain injuries, or we are trying to rehab language after a stroke, there's still a lot that we don't know, right? A lot of it's just compensatory, or like, here's what you can do to make up for this loss, but we don't exactly have there's still so many different diseases and disorders we don't have cures for. Anyway, so I wanted to better understand that. And then when I got into the PhD program, you have to finish. So in order to fully finish my license, you do what's called a clinical fellowship year. So my clinical fellowship was at the Center for Brain Health at UT Dallas, which is where I work now. But I got there and they were like, well, they called it high performance brain training at the time, this like cognitive training. And it was like with corporate executives and teaching them how to be more efficient, how to process information, how to enhance innovation. And I was like, whoa, this is number one, so helpful. First of all, how's nobody ever like told me this before? This would have been really helpful just even as a student in like high school, or younger. And two, like everyone should know this. This is so interesting. And so I didn't know it at the time. That was kind of my first exposure to, it was this nice meld of both. We're taking research, we're combining it, we're making it translational. We're teaching it to people in a way that's easy to understand and easy to apply to their life. And so, yeah, so that was kind of how I fell in love with this idea of high performance, and that, okay, we all have a brain. We're really not taught how it works. Now with social media and all these different platforms and podcasts, it's easier for people to get this information. But even like 10 years ago, that just wasn't a thing. So, yeah, was absolutely fascinated with that. And so now my current area of focus is exactly that. It's all about how to be proactive. What are things you can do in your day-to-day life, ideally prevent decline, and what does it look like, to keep a healthy brain your whole life? Because if we look at the last century, the human lifespan has doubled, but we haven't done, so we've done a ton for like our physical, our heart health, we know a lot about that, but nothing has been done in terms of lengthening your brain span. And so that's kind of where my main area of research is focused on, and creating a technology that's scalable that can disseminate that information to as many people as possible. Because, nobody wants to live to be 80 or even 100 if your brain's not going to keep up with your body.
Yeah, very well said. So, like, what practices would you say are, like, how does one optimize the brain? You're talking about, like, that's what you're studying, how to increase the brain's lifespan. How would one increase the brain's lifespan? Like, are there a few things that are most important and then other things that are pretty important? Like, maybe walk through some of those things.
Yeah, I love the way you asked that question. And that's actually what we're seeking to really better understand with this research study. So it's called the BrainHealth Project. It's a 10-year longitudinal study. We currently have over 20,000 people enrolled, and we're seeking to have 100,000 people enrolled because we want to get a really large sample. We want it to be a landmark study. I don't know if you're familiar with the Framingham study, but it's a study that was in the 1950s around heart health. And it was in Framingham, Massachusetts, and they went door to door with a clipboard, just asking people about their lifestyle. And that really in the 50s was what sparked the whole like aerobics, cardiovascular movement of understanding, okay, you need to exercise, you need to, your diet matters to prevent getting a heart attack. Because at the time in the 50s, like everyone was just like, oh, you're going to die of a heart attack. It's just a matter of when. And so now the parallel to that now is like, okay, everyone's like, you're just going to get dementia at some point. And so, so with this study, we want to do what was done for the heart, but for the brain. And so we want to see like, what are those lifestyle things? And as you, kind of mentioned, there's so many different things that you can do, and the variability of what's healthy for me versus what's healthy for you, there's such a broad spectrum. And so that's why we want to do this massive study to really understand and to track it over time. But it's not just an observational study, and it's not a classic randomized controlled trial where you have a control group and then one group gets the intervention, because we want everyone to benefit. And we also know that everyone needs a little something different. So we have an incredible biostatistician where it's kind of like an evergreen sort of data mining project in that sense. But essentially we're seeing like, okay, if we intervene, if we give you certain strategies and you do them or don't do them, or you do them this much and this person does them this much, like what do you need, right? What's optimal for each person? So anyway, so you ask a good question. That's definitely what we're trying to understand. But before that, and the nice thing is we don't have to wait 10 years to start learning. Like we're already publishing papers. We're wanting to feed that information back into our participants actually, so they can learn and benefit from it all along the way. But in terms of, best things for brain health, I feel so kind of, I feel anticlimactic when I say this, because it's like everyone wants to know some secret or some really cool thing. And it's like, I hate to break it to you, but it's just the basic things that nobody wants to do, like sleeping 8 hours, or, choosing to like not go the fast route when it comes to food, and like choosing convenience over actual nutrients. It's managing screen time. It's these things that are just, it's like swimming upstream in our culture, and a lot of really toxic brain habits are just very normalized. So everyone's just like, it's just normal. Like you don't do this or that. And so I think, So yeah, so I'm happy I can walk through a couple like just of the just of the big categories, but a lot of it is, yeah, they're things that everyone kind of knows they should do. I think the difference that maybe I can share more is like the specific brain impact that people don't realize. Like I think everyone knows, like, yeah, I function better when I get enough sleep. But do you actually understand what's happening? That your brain goes through this process of literally like washing out the toxins from the day, and that does not happen while you're awake. It cannot happen. There's certain systems that come into play, things like that. And to know that sleep is going to, or lack of sleep rather, is going to put you at higher risk for all these different diseases, but then your cognitive function, your attention, your memory, even things like empathy are going to be negatively impacted. So I think it's kind of neat to have, studies and data to point to just say like here, or just even, I thought this was fascinating. I think it was like, oh shoot, I don't know the exact statistic, but it was something like maybe 8 out of 10 people, individuals that have like some mental health issue also have clinically significant insomnia. Like there's this correlation between, not sleeping and mental health. And so I think, anyway, we all are kind of like vaguely aware of these things more and more now. There's been such good work done in terms of raising awareness, but I think the actual implementation of like, okay, what does it look like to make behavior changes in my day, to really implement that? And so that's where I think we have a real opportunity to support people in that and to try to honestly normalize it and make it a thing. Like I know, people really want to destigmatize just even talking about mental health or going to see a counselor or this or that. But I think like, just societally, what does it look like to actually really make that possible for people and like to be able to sustain those types of, just those routines or those things that just need to be a regular part of life that like previously haven't. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like I read like Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep, and that probably what really boosted the talking about sleep and the importance of it. And he made a point that said like out of all the species on Earth, we're the only species that like ruins our sleep schedule like purposefully or hurts ourselves in that way. Like no other animal like will just stay up and waste their sleep. Like sleep is such an important factor, and it's like that paired with like the screens. Like I think there's been studies on like the blue light and how that like can impact sleep maybe. And I bet it's like a double whammy of like so many people are staying up later, not syncing with the sun. They have artificial light. They're looking at these blue screens. They're getting less sleep. And it's probably then tying into like the food that they eat because they're staying up later and whatnot. And yeah, it's just an interesting like triple whammy of like negative impacts, negative, and it just keeps building. And I could see that we just need to push this information farther out. Like the neuroscience is what really kind of woke me up to like, wow, sleep is so important. Like your memory, your focus, your ability to perform. It really woke me up to like the importance of it. But like, I guess, what would you say like would be your advice to someone who stays up late? Like what would be like the hammer down? Like why should they get more sleep? Because like some people might hear all this and say, oh yeah, I should sleep. But like, what would you say like is the worst impact of someone who's like sleeping maybe 6 hours a night? Or it's hard to say maybe, but.
Sure. The effects are so widespread. I think, like if you're looking for, so okay, when people are like, what is one thing I can do for my brain? Sleep 8 hours. Like prioritize your sleep. That's like the one best thing. That and probably like movement daily, I think are two of the most, well, there's like 10 things, but those are probably like the top two that I would mention, because it's like, that's the one closest thing to a magic bullet that we have. Getting that sleep literally enhances every single brain and body function that we have. And there's nothing else like it. There's no supplement. There's no, like, nothing can make up for it. No amount of coffee, no amount of, whatever you're taking is going to replace that, that natural process that your brain was designed to do. So yeah, I think I love the point, that you're making about like we're the only people that do that, and we're just pushing ourselves out of sync with nature. Another thing, Matt came to speak in the fall, and we're actually doing a collaboration with Aura Ring with him that's going to be really interesting on learning even more about the brain and the connection to sleep.
What is Aura Ring, real quick?
Oh, yeah. So Aura Ring, so Matt Walker, author of Why We Sleep, he is the chief science officer for Aura. And so I have one actually. It's a smart ring wearable, tracks your sleep. It's probably one of the most accurate one on the market, that gives you information about deep sleep, REM, sleep efficiency. It also gives you a readiness score. It does track, like it's tracking your heart rate variability, continuously monitoring all of those things. And so that feedback is really interesting and really helpful. Anyway, and so one of the things he said when he was visiting, he was like, when you go against, what did he say? I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like when you go against nature, like you end up losing, and that means losing means sickness and disease. And so even thinking about history and how, like with the invention of the light bulb, prior to the invention of the light bulb, people slept 11 hours because you woke up with the sun and you went to bed when the sun went down. Like you couldn't do anything in the dark. And we were designed to sleep and be in sync with those rhythms. And so with the invention of the light bulb, we're now going against nature. So we're staying awake later. And then with that, this was something that kind of was an aristocratic sign of wealth. They would eat really late too. So now you're eating at a time when you definitely shouldn't be eating. And that's interfering with all sorts of other things and interfering with your sleep quality. So I just thought that was super interesting to think about, just that shift of like, it's allowed us, you think about the Industrial Revolution, you think about just all these things, these kind of modern technology advancements that are really incredible, but that we sort of lose sight. It's almost like, is that really helping us? Like, what is that helping us do? And it's helping us work more. And so it's kind of like, you have to look at like where these things are coming from. And I think we just take all modern advancements. Usually we see the positive of it, right? Like it's like, oh, it allows us to do this that we couldn't do before. And it's like, well, maybe there's a good reason that we couldn't do that before. Maybe we should, just be cautious and try to understand, things were very intentionally designed. And so, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, that really is. Like, I've heard people, when I talk to people about this, because I'm kind of passionate about sleep, even though I'm not a scientist, I know some of the things about it. And like I say to people, like, yeah, try to get that 8 hours, 7 at minimum. And like these people, I go to engineering school and all these guys are like, well, I'm so busy and I work and I go to school. So I need to I don't need to sleep as much because I need to be productive for X amount of hours in the day. And I'm like, well, when you're sleeping less, you technically cannot be as productive, period. Like it's just, you're not going to remember things as well. You're not going to be able to move as effectively when you're doing your work. You probably have a higher risk of crashing when you're moving to work or to school. It's like you're just compounding it in some sense. And aren't there studies on how like when you decrease your sleep, you actually are like increasing the risk for dementia and whatnot later in life?
Yeah, there's some interesting studies around, so not only just prolonged, like chronic lack of sleep, that definitely is a risk factor. And then as people get older, they're finding there is a correlation with disruption in sleep and then the development of things like dementia or Alzheimer's. So there's an interesting and important relationship there. And part of that is because, so as I mentioned, so your body has the lymphatic system. You've probably heard of like maybe lymphatic massage or like ways to move out the trash. Your brain has what's called the glymphatic system. And so that's taking out the trash every night, but it only happens when you're asleep. What it's removing is a lot of the buildup of proteins and toxins during the day. And so Alzheimer's, like one of the hallmark things is the buildup of those proteins. So it's kind of like, if you're not sort of cleansing and washing those out, then they build up and then they cause problems because they're not supposed to be there, because your brain is regularly every 24 hours supposed to have a period where they get flushed out.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, it seems like we could go on and on about the importance of sleep, but I think we kind of covered that. And I kind of want to talk about this idea that I've seen just on Instagram or YouTube, or just heard people like Huberman talk about, where it's like exercise is like the only way you can decrease the risk of cognitive decline, or decrease the rate at which your brain cognitively declines. Like, can you walk into why that might be the case and what's going on? And like, yeah.
Sure. So exercise has this unique ability to modify the brain at a molecular level, at a structural, so like functional connectivity, the different areas talking to each other, and then also in a neurotransmitter level, right, of like giving you, whether it's norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, right, these different things that kind of really impact the brain. It also increases the production of BDNF, which is really important for the genesis of new cells, so just the overall health of the brain. It stimulates specifically areas like the hippocampus, so responsible for learning and memory, as well as the prefrontal cortex, which your frontal lobe is the brain's CEO. It's the last part of the brain to develop, so in your late 20s, and the first part of the brain to start to decline. We see that in the 40s. So anything you can be doing that's going to stimulate those areas and keep them really healthy, frontal lobe especially for aging, and hippocampus too. I mean, really both of those. So yeah, I mean, exercise has this unique ability to create that boost. I would say, though, that a lot of the research that we do at the Center for Brain Health is around specifically cognitive strategies, or kind of like tactics in terms of how you manage information. And so that's also something we've seen in our studies that, so I don't know if you know this, most people don't. I definitely didn't know it beforehand, but just as you age, you lose about 2% of your brain blood flow every decade of your life. So there's just a little bit less, right, every decade. And with cognitive training, you actually can increase brain blood flow if you consistently practice certain strategies that exercise your frontal lobe. This particular study was over a course of 3 months where they engaged in practicing these strategies. And this one particular case, he increased his brain blood flow by like 12%. So it was like, and it was, what we want to study now is then the longer effects of that over years, and right, and how you maintain that. But if you're thinking, wow, like you naturally are going to be on this decline slope, and then if there's things you can do, and the thing with exercise is, so exercise is going to boost blood flow to the whole body all around, but it's not going to stay elevated. It's just going to kind of be a more temporary increase that you'll feel, and there's tremendous benefits from that. But in terms of how to keep that enhanced, it really has to do with how are you using your brain every day to process complex information, or like really in terms of thinking and problem solving.
Oh, so you're saying like the exercise is useful for like the short bursts of pumping a lot of blood through your brain, but you're saying strategies such as like thinking through complex problems or doing some kind of math or whatnot, like that actually does assist in the blood that flows through your brain?
Yes. So the more your neurons are working, I mean, their primary source of fuel is glucose and oxygen, right? That gets delivered through your blood. And so the more that you're working, the more those centers are going to demand the need for fuel. And so that's going to increase blood flow to those areas. And that just keeps them healthier, right? Just kind of like, it's not a muscle, but right. But in demanding that nutrients and then continuing to work, it keeps them healthier.
Oh, that's interesting. I might have seen something that wasn't true, but this guy was saying, yeah, like doing crossword puzzles or, doing like math or doing, thinking, that won't actually help in the reduction of cognitive decline nearly as much as exercise. But like you're saying, it's kind of both. Like you kind of need both sides of it. Like you got to keep your brain thinking, but you also got to keep your body moving.
Absolutely.
Like the most optimal.
Yes.
And
I would say both for sure. And I actually agree that crossword puzzles are not going to stave off decline. And that's also, you have to think about like your brain gets really good at what you practice. So practicing crossword puzzles, it's not going to generalize to other areas that you really need, but engaging in challenges. Yeah, absolutely. So if that's something, like having some form of stimulation, but I think when people, they like to sort of oversimplify it and it's like, oh, just do a crossword puzzle every day. And it's like, well, doing a crossword puzzle every day when you're not sleeping and you're eating processed foods and you're having a sedentary lifestyle and, you're lonely, that's not going to cut it. So just a holistic perspective is important.
Yeah, that is. And I also see that you're a person who practices yoga and meditation, and you maybe even are an instructor in some of this. And yeah, I want to like walk through like what does yoga and meditation and breath work have on the brain? Like, what are the positive effects of all that?
Yes, one of my favorite topics. I'm 200-hour certified, and I taught for a few years. I'm not currently teaching right now. My priority is just my own practice. And so, yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, I don't, yoga may not be for everybody, but I have to say the benefits are really like hard to kind of turn down. And especially because there's so many different types of yoga too for different phases of life. But anytime, so we talked about the benefits of physical exercise. So all of those apply to yoga, right? You're getting all of those brain boosting benefits. But then yoga brings in this nice aspect of, mindfulness as well as the breath work or meditation. And so I like using the term breath work because I think it's something that I think when you get into meditation, it's like, it can be sort of a turnoff where people can kind of just tune it out. And it's like, well, there are some similarities and differences, but when it comes to truly understanding how to breathe and breathing and being in the present moment with your body and syncing up your breath and your movement, and then your brain then it has to be present, is one of the best things that you can do. And specifically with breath work, this is also, this is faster than sleep. So, but literally, if you just, and I have to do this every so often, right, throughout the day, is just like taking a deep breath. And it's just like this immediate change, right? You immediately feel that change. And so what's happening when you take a deeper breath or a slower breath is you are affecting your levels of norepinephrine. So there's a part of your brain called the locus ceruleus, and it means the blue spot. So it's kind of in the brain stem, and it's what releases norepinephrine. And so when you have too much norepinephrine, it's when you're kind of like anxious and it's hard to focus, you're all over the place. Too little norepinephrine is when you're kind of groggy. Maybe you just woke up, you're kind of just getting going. And so there's an optimal sweet spot level for that. And the really cool thing is that the locus ceruleus creates norepinephrine in response to how much carbon dioxide is in your blood, like moment to moment. So when you take a deeper breath and you have more oxygen, or rather you're having a better, more optimal levels of oxygen to carbon dioxide in your blood, then your locus ceruleus responds to that and knows how much norepinephrine to produce, therefore helping you feel more steady, calm, focused, as opposed to anxious. So when you're taking a breath, it's like just giving you a glimpse of how crazy complex and intricate the body is to know, like, whoa, this one breath, the levels in my blood of carbon dioxide are then going to impact the neurotransmitters produced and then my ability to think. So anytime, like, that's why even like 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes of breath work can go a long way. And that's one practice that I think, I recommend to everybody. I do my 10 minutes every morning. If I don't have 10 minutes, I do 5. And it's like that's one of the things that sets up my day, I think, to flow better. So yeah, I think anyone that is curious about yoga or breath work or any of that, it's neat to just go explore and just experience the benefits for yourself. It kind of is then a self-reinforcing practice because you feel good, and I like feeling good.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I see how like meditation slash breath work slash mindfulness can like make you appreciate, or like gratitude comes up as, like, you were talking about gratitude in one of your posts, and I really can resonate, where it's like sometimes when you slow down, breathe, and just like think about your life or think about the world or just think about not much, what comes into your mind seems to be the things that you should be grateful for. And like walk me through maybe why someone would want to be grateful, like to better their mental health or their brain health.
Sure. So gratitude is a great practice for both mental health and brain health. I think, let's see. Okay, so one of the studies, this is really cool from a science perspective, to know that when you practice gratitude, you actually boost your immune system. So you actually have, I think they did blood samples, but they had less of a certain immune marker in their blood after practicing gratitude. And this particular study was sort of a different take on gratitude. So it had to do with recalling a time that they were thanked. So actually someone expressing gratitude to them. So this is kind of neat to know if you want to go give a friend or a loved one a boost, you want to help their immune system, let them know how much you appreciate them and like really genuinely thank them for something. It doesn't have to be verbal. It can be written, really any form. And so this practice was like having some bullet points of that and just kind of reviewing that and not just sort of like going through the list, but really thinking about it and then feeling it in your body. Gratitude is definitely a state, right, that you can kind of be in. And I can feel it, right? It's like you have better heart rate variability, like all of these, your parasympathetic nervous system is coming online. So that's your more rest and digest. And it just feels good, right? And so when we feel good and when we feel safe and when we feel appreciated, all of those things contribute to physical health and then brain health. And so I think really getting into when we talk about the nervous system and like sympathetic fight or flight systems versus parasympathetic, these are some practices that are really helpful in getting us out of fight or flight and into more of that parasympathetic kind of calm, relaxed, alert phase. And they're both like, you need a balance of both, but I guess gratitude specifically is one way. And then another thing I'll say is just like, and I don't know how much you get into this on your podcast, or you can edit this if you want. But like, as a believer, like I think that God's design for everything is super intentional. And I think that while it's cool that science is really proving a lot of things in the Bible right, but like everything we need to know is there. And so like a huge part of when you look at like what scripture calls us to is like, how many times does it say be thankful? And so to really like be like, yeah, he wasn't just wanting praise or God. It's just like, it's because it's good for you. And it's actually good for not just like your physical body, like your brain health or your mental health, but like your soul. And so I think that it's, when I think about the brain, a lot of times I'm in academic settings. And so I'm only talking about the scientific studies that show that, but it's like, it's kind of impossible to think about your brain and not think about the rest of your body or like your soul or your spirit or any of, these other more intangibles that science has a hard time measuring. But just because we don't measure them well doesn't mean they're not there. It doesn't mean that they aren't a really important part of all these things. So I think when it comes to gratitude, the interesting thing to me is that gratitude is about, it's being thankful, but it's like to someone else, right? Whether that be if you believe in God or like people, but you need a connection to others and just how we were designed for relationships. And so just that for that to not be missed, I think is really interesting. And it's like, yeah, I'll stop there.
No, yeah, that's really good. Like, I was thinking about that with my roommate last night of how, like, well, an interesting evidence for God from my perspective is, like, you think of animals and, they live their lives, they eat, and then they fight and they die. But like, if you think of humans, it's like we have an ability to like self-reflect, and we have the ability to be grateful for our situation and be grateful for others, and like have like religious conversations, discussions about the unknown, discussions about God. And it's like that kind of beautiful connection that humans are able to have. Like, science can answer some of those questions on why that might occur, but like, it's just like, to me, like that's like evidence of like, there's got to be something more. There's got to be some reason why we can do that other than just random, like probability. And like, so like that, I don't know, like you could walk through maybe the science of why we're able to do that. But like, in my opinion, that also can like be like, you can talk about the science, but then you can also talk about like the religious side of like, we were built in a way that we are able to have gratitude and think about God and like, think of the future and of death and whatnot. And like, to me, like, I think you can have both science and religion. And like, I'm very glad you brought that up, because it seems like a lot of people are, they focus only on science. And I'm just kind of like, well, you're getting maybe half the picture. It's really important, but there's a whole nother side to things that, it's worth exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are, it's like we live in a day and age of wanting to be or needing to be or fearing or like this political correctness and wanting to be open and accepting of all things. But it's like, I yeah, you said it well, that it's like we can't only look at half of the picture, or I wouldn't even say that that's half. I'd say that's like one little piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it's so important when you think about holistically, and even like this, these studies now that focus so much on like people, brain health, and the connection to having a sense of purpose. And it's like, go figure, like we were like knowing why you were created and what you're here for matters for your health, for your brain, for cognitive decline, for dementia. Like, it's like, yes, it does. Like, that's something that we need to contemplate. And I think that something that is a little bit, I was talking earlier about the pull of culture and just kind of like, we're just moving so fast, and there's so much, I've seen different things where it's kind of like we're too busy to care, or we're too busy to your point, contemplate those deeper questions or the unknown or death or what that means. And it's just like, oh, I don't need to worry about that. At least in American culture a lot. And so I think, anyway, I just think it's really important and interesting to see how, the people that have the greatest, like people that are rooted in a sense of purpose, and even studies around spiritual connection, prayer, having like that strong, connection there, is linked to better health outcomes. And it's just like, I don't know if you've read, any of John Mark Comer's books, but I recently read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, over winter break. And it was like, it was so convicting. And he said that there was a study that looked at, so he was talking about Sabbath and the importance of rest. And so we talked about the importance of sleep, but also kind of, and then, regulating your system and having downtime, and then pairing that with gratitude. So Sabbath is supposed to be like, a day of gratitude, right? And like worship and rest, and resting in that. And so he looked at this culture that they very religiously take their one day a week of rest. And he did the math, and it was like it was like they live on average 10 years longer. And if you add up all of those one day a week of rest, it adds up to 10 years. So it's like you literally, through that rest, it's like, anyway, just the design of that, of like how, not that for me, my goal is not necessarily to live longer. It's to, have the best quality of life with the life that I do have, so that I can do the things that I'm here to do. Not so that like my life will be easy, or so that I can enjoy it or get, maximum enjoyment out of all these things. It's like, I want to feel good so that I can focus on other people, because when I don't get enough sleep, or I'm in a bad mood or whatever, it's like, then I'm not able to show up and be outward focused. I'm then just thinking about me, right? Because it's like, it's hard not to when you don't feel good or you don't have what you need. So I think, anyway, like when it comes to, like, I am obsessed with this idea of like wanting to continually improve and be my best self. And I think it's good to have that motivation and push yourself, but also that it's like, it's not kind of it's ultimately not for me, right? It's like, it's because it's for a bigger purpose. And it's because like, I need to show up feeling good, firing on all cylinders, because like, I'm here for a reason and I have stuff to do. And I think when people lose that, or don't have that, drive, or like an understanding of that, then you see a lot of depression, you see a lot of mental health things, because it's like, there's just a really big missing piece.
Yeah, that's really well said. Like, having that sense of purpose, like the why I'm here. It's not just about me, and it's not just even about the people around me. It's like, this could be something so much bigger. And from what I can say, like, acting as if that's true, there is something, a huge reason why, like that gives me even way more purpose. And like, another thing that like I think about is sometimes like, well, I like learning about science, like how to better my life, optimize my health, become a better version of myself, so that I can help others. Like you said, you can't like help someone when you're feeling, groggy or depressed or whatnot, but like attempting to better your health so that you can be more of a person who like inspires people, or who makes people think about the important things in life, or like I like to say like implements the characteristics of Jesus into your life. It's like, I feel like if you're a person who has a lot of like health, like if your health is optimized, you're able to act more like Jesus like in situations. It's like you're able to be more grateful, you're able to be more humble, and maybe like you're able to try your best and like be more honest with people maybe. And like I feel that like when I'm feeling amazing, like I just want to I want to improve the lives of others. So it's like I truly can see how that connection is there, and it's crazy, the connection, but it's really cool.
I love that.
Yeah, and so like I was going to ask, like, what does having close relationships in your life do to your brain health and mental health? Like, what's the importance of this? Because we're so social, but like, I know some people who are like, I don't open up to anyone. And I'm just kind of like, what is that doing to you, you know?
Yeah, it's not good. Yes, relationships are, so like we said, we were designed for relationships. We were meant for that. If you want to look at, if you want to take the evolution perspective and think that, you know, we evolved as cavemen and we're like in these little tribes, the connection to other people was essential for survival. So, you know, if you didn't have good relationships or you were cast out from the group, like you weren't going to make it. And that's going to trigger kind of this like life or death feeling, which is why rejection hurts so badly, right? We're made for social connection and acceptance and being a part of something. So yeah, on all levels, again, it's going to impact cardiovascular health. So you have better heart health or reactivity to stress when you have strong social support. Your immune system, again, it helps with things like your natural, I think they're called T cells, or natural killer cells that help fight cancer. Those are increased when you have social support, less depression and anxiety, more longevity, longer life. If you look at areas of the world, like blue zones, one of the biggest things that the different blue zones have in common is this sense of community. You've got multi-generations living together. You've got, we're not shipping the elderly off to assisted living facilities, but they're right there with their families. They have, again, that purpose, right? They're a part of things. There's a lot of, there's a lot of walking, there's a lot of there's all these other things, but community is one of the biggest ones. And then you also see less cognitive decline. Like we saw this really exacerbated with COVID, where there were people in hospitals or nursing homes, and when they couldn't be, like they got COVID and right, no one could visit and they couldn't see family or loved ones. And like the rates of mortality just skyrocketed. And so it's like that connection to people, from a very just objective standpoint, it's like, yeah, your immune system's less, but it's like really, it really does matter for our survival. And we were really wired for that. So, yes, I think and it doesn't mean what that looks like can be a little bit different for everybody. I think, it's like having one or two close people that you can really confide in, that you feel like fully know you, is so important. So to anyone who feels like they don't have anyone like that, or they can't, it's like invest in that. That is so important. They also, I'm thinking of that other study where they followed, I always mix up if it was Yale or Harvard, but they followed that. It was like the lifelong kind of happiness study. And they followed these men from when they were like in their 20s in school through like, I think some of them are still in the study now and they're like in their 80s or 90s. But one of the findings was that if they had like an illness or a sickness or like an injury, their recovery was so much better if they had a healthy, happy marriage. And like the ones that lived the longest and the best, like did have good relationships. So, there's all kinds of evidence from all different angles. But yeah, that's something that, no one can be an island, that it will take its toll in one form or another. So definitely, find people, and it's hard. Like it does take work, it takes effort, but all the good things do.
Man, that's really well said. Like, that's interesting about like the marriage, like statistic of like people who, you said something about people who are married lived longer and healthier, or people who had solid marriage relationships, they lived a longer, healthier life. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and if they did have, say, a surgery or an illness or something, they recovered more quickly and were able to bounce back. So,
wow, that's amazing. It's really amazing to hear. And like, we live in a society where some people are like, walking away from the idea of marriage, and I'm just kind of like, this tradition might be here for a reason. It's like, that is like an interesting scientific reason, but like, there's a ton of other reasons, like you're saying. That's just one piece, but that's really cool to hear. And I I'm going to switch topics to something that is maybe it's controversial, not really, but like, so like my first episode of this whole thing was actually, I recorded myself talking about porn addiction and how like that was a problem that I had. And I've walked away from that problem, honestly, because of this podcast. It's like a great accountability that I've had. But I was actually wanting to ask a person who knows a lot about the brain, like, what does porn do to the brain, like for guys and maybe for girls too? But like, you know, my audience is a lot of like guys my age, honestly, and a lot of them watch because it like statistically, I think it's like 90% of guys my age, 20 to 25, watch porn, and a lot of young people do. And it's just like, I'm curious if you know much about this.
So I haven't dug into this like super in depth, but I will say you're absolutely right. It is so pervasive in society and young people, and men and women. And it's I guess from a neuro perspective, you know, you hear all about dopamine, right? And it's like, so it's creating kind of this, this need for like more and more and more and more, right? To sort of get the same amount of like pleasure or thrill or high. So you're kind of destroying the reward system. And that is serious. That makes it harder to just get enjoyment out of just regular things in life, right? You're having to then like always top it. And it's unrealistic because it's not real life. So I think it's really dangerous in that sense of like reality, but also calibrating, you know, your reward system, because you have one reward system for everything. So it's like that. And when I say reward system, you know, also dopamine is not just like people say the pleasure hormone. It's really, dopamine is like, we could call it the molecule of motivation. It's something that drives you to do things. And so we need, you know, you think about, it's like we need men to initiate and to like be going out and doing things, right? And like if that drive is taken away, then that is going to affect careers, that affects relationships, that affects, I mean, really every area of your life. So to just understand that, but the good news. So one, I just want to say awesome that you feel like you've found accountability through this podcast. Like I love hearing that. Way to go. And I think, the good news is that our brains, like we have neuroplasticity, right? So you can retrain those things, but is it going to be really hard? Yes. So like, just to like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but it is good news. So, you know, you can choose differently and you can slowly, change and rewire those circuits and those habits. But it's also, you've got to have kind of something to replace it with, because to kind of just try to walk away from that, is going to be really challenging. And I don't know enough about like ways to maybe what that looks like to do that successfully, but I would say, you know, like repetition is everything. So, and accountability, like having that, as we talked about, social support, is a huge piece of that. And kind of knowing like, but I think to just understand, I should look into some studies to see like what are some of the longer term effects of that. 'Cause really, I know the reward system is the main one that's coming to mind.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, yeah, I've heard some studies say like erectile dysfunction can occur, and it's just like, you know, and you're just going to feel less, you know, happy in life because you're boosting your, I don't know, the amount of dopamine you're giving yourself is just way more than normal. So you're not feeling happy at the baseline and whatnot. But yeah, like I just wanted to maybe hear from your perspective, like some of the cons of doing it. And like, I've just been able to replace the habit by just going to the gym or like actually creating clips for this podcast. Like I just have switched. It's like, okay, switch. And then over like 4 months, I've kind of built that habit up and like whatnot. That's just my experience. But yeah, like it's good to hear like that we have this neuroplasticity. Like that was another thing that really motivated me. It was like, you're not totally screwed, Harley. Like, you know, your brain can actually rewire into like, and you actually can come back to your normal self again.
Yes.
Like, and so like, that's like really motivational and very interesting.
Good.
honestly, it's like a blessing.
Yes.
So,
and I think, yeah, it's like you want to give people the information, not to scare people out of it, but to just understand the seriousness of what those choices lead to. And then to be like, hey, and here's what, like, you can do something about it. And yeah, you're not totally screwed. That's definitely not the case. Like, you have this incredible ability. And, yeah, so I think more people need to hear that and be talking about it and just understand. And like, I think it is something that isn't talked about like enough for people to really know or feel comfortable even sharing like how to overcome that. So, way to
yeah.
go.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's one of my goals. But I guess another question, like with our society that we live in, like so many people are like scrolling on these like 5-second, 10-second videos, TikTok, Instagram. Like, what are the effects of like that? Like, typically, it seems like our attention span might be decreasing. Like, is that true? Like, what is this doing to our society, to our brains?
Absolutely. So, as we said, the brain you have is a brain that you have built based on how you use it every single day. And so the good news is that you can change what you do every day, and then you can change your brain. When it comes to social media, the infinite scroll, the continually refreshing, the kind of, they call it the slot machine. You know how you like pull down your thing to refresh and you see if you got something new. These are things, tactics taken from casinos, right? That they know about, just this drive for, this desire for reward or like getting a notification. And it's something I'm like in my own life working on, recognizing. To help myself with this, I turn off, like, I don't get any push notifications for emails, for nothing.
Smart.
I turn everything off, and it's like, I want to choose the time. Like, I don't want to let that interrupt my attention, my focus. Like, I want to pick the times when I'm going to go in and check that. But then what's happened is that then I'll just go check it, right? There's no notifications now. I'm just like checking it. And it's like, I compulsively am checking my email. And so I was just like, okay, I really like the advice that we give at the center is, have like your 2 different times a day that you check email. Like, I'm going to be on email from 9 to 10 and then again from 3 to 4 or whatever time, you pick how that works. Because ultimately, like, there's nothing that happens at 10 o'clock that like couldn't wait until 3 p.m. for me to respond to, probably. You know what I mean? Like, I should already have my day set up of like, here's my priorities. These are the things I'm doing. Like, it is what it is, and I'll get to it tomorrow. And to kind of also set that expectation, just even culturally in your workplace or with whoever. So yeah, I'm having to really work to retrain that. And to your point, I think having, we talk about neuroplasticity. So a good opportunity is if you notice like, okay, I'm reaching for my phone. I am going to check social media again, but like I just checked it a minute ago and I don't need to be checking it right now. Like, sometimes I ask myself, I'm like, so sometimes it's a form of procrastination, which procrastination is actually emotional avoidance, or like, it's like, I don't want to feel stressed, or like, I don't want to take on this task. Like, I feel overwhelmed and I don't want to do it. So I actually will just feel better if I just, check this and get a quick hit of dopamine over here. And that's easier. That feels better. And so that's a self-reinforcing circuit, right? Because your brain's like, oh, that feels better than doing this hard task on the computer that I don't want to do. Okay, so what you can do in that instance is you catch yourself. You've just done the quote bad habit that you want to break. I opened up Instagram. Okay. And so then it's like that moment, because that circuit is kind of warm, if you will. That's a time to replace it with a different habit. So maybe it's like, okay, when I'm feeling stressed like this, instead I can just stand up and get a sip of water, or I could take a deep breath, or I could just like look out the window, right? Like, kind of like, okay, what's going to be my behavior instead? And then you kind of just try to keep doing that to replace it. So then that way, when it's like, I have this urge to like check my phone, it's like, okay, no, that's actually a signal from my body telling me like, I'm actually really stressed. And so what's going to help me more is to do this instead. So that's one that I feel like is a lot of people can relate to probably. And it's something I'm actively trying to work on. But yeah, in terms of our attention, we've conditioned ourselves to be interrupted every few minutes. I think like the average attention span is 30 seconds. And we see that with TikTok videos. We see that with the way, we have to have these short clips. You have to have your hook line. You have to have, like, it's like to get people to keep their attention. And so I think, that is a tension that I feel in terms of even like contributing content to that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I want to share information that will reach people, but I also don't want to be reinforcing a platform or a habit that is actually, harming people or their attention or what that looks like. But I think with that being said, it's like, sure, you could talk about responsibility in terms of the tech platforms, but you could also say like, I am in control of my life and I determine what I take in and when and how. And so like, again, this is one of those going kind of against the grain of culture of like, I'm going to be different with this and I'm going to have set times and I'm going to not respond immediately or I'm going to resist that urge. But it takes a while to actually build up that muscle to the point where like, you're good. But it's like every time when I am successful in doing that, I feel so much better. I notice my stress levels are down. I notice that I feel happier. Like I'm not as worried. Like I was on vacation for a week and was like, I'm just going to be off the grid. And it was awesome, right? Like I didn't miss it. And so anyway, so to anyone who is concerned about their attention or, has kids or is worried about like just even like teenagers or what that looks like now, because younger and younger, we've got babies with, with iPads. What is that doing? And so it's just like, technology in and of itself is not good or evil. It's just how you use it. It's a tool. And so just being really mindful of how you're going to use that. And I think that, and we just can't be lazy is the thing. So
I agree. Like I create these clips for the pod, but it's like, as I'm doing it, I'm like having this like moral quandary of like, should I be doing this? Aren't I adding to the problem? But then I'm like, hopefully the things that I'm putting out there are like making people think, maybe motivating them to be better. And so it's like, I have to play this game with myself. Cause like part of me is like, just stop doing it. But I'm like, well, I'm going to keep doing it. And same with your content too. It's like, hopefully you can like feel okay about putting it out there because it's like, like this is a great tip to how to better your life through neuroscience. And it's like, well, that's a beautiful thing to be scrolling on and then actually makes you think. And so like, that's why I can resonate with that and can understand that. But I was also going to ask, because you mentioned these like kids on iPads and kids on screens. Do you know, like, is there research to like suggest like what's happening when all these young kids are on screens and not socializing and going out and playing like 100 years ago? Like people would just be outside or, like what's
yeah,
happening?
I'm sure there are some studies, and I'm sure we're going to have more coming out just as people are able to follow them longitudinally. But what I will say is this, I think, I'd like to be sort of on the positive, hopeful spin of this, of that, kids now have access to the top TED Talks, to the information. When they're curious, they can learn about it. So I'm actually always really blown away. And what's cool is that they're getting that information right when they have, like we talked about curiosity at the beginning. So right when that spark of curiosity hits, and that's actually the perfect chemical cocktail for your brain to learn and absorb that information. So when they're curious about something and they're in that phase where they're asking why about a million things, they can go read and learn and watch videos and they can get that. So they're going to, the way that they're learning, is different than, people that grew up without that. And then I would just say, as long as they're getting that, plus they are still going outside and playing with their friends, they're getting that time with their family, they're getting, as long as they're not just in front of the screen 24/7, it's not going to be a bad thing. It's actually can be a really cool thing, that I think will be really neat. And I don't know how exactly we can quantify that, but I think there's a positive thing to being able to have access to information at your fingertips. It's just now it is more of a thing of information overload and being able to discern what's important versus not, because there's just simply too much coming at us. But yeah, I think for parents that are worried about that, or babies or whatever, is like, I think, when they're really young, like none, like babies don't need that. Toddlers, even, I would say, like waiting until they're a little bit older. And this is not founded on, this is just kind of my general feeling on this, but I think waiting until they're older,
Yeah.
and then when they are, just being really diligent about how, like, time limits, because it's addicting and it's designed to be.
Yeah, it really is. Totally. Yeah, I like that optimistic side. Like sometimes I surround myself with people who are more pessimistic, and this is like, it's great to hear both sides, because that's so true about like you can go and find anything you want in a positive sense, like learn about the best TED Talks, to like whatever. And that's like something 100 years ago no one was able to do. So it's like I love seeing that positive side. And yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, really interesting. And I guess like a final question, or just one of the last questions I have for you, is like what is your next research project that you want to focus on, or like what are your goals for the future? Like what do you want to learn more about in the brain or just in life?
So we're really interested so I brought up Oura Ring and wearables, and, kind of like one of the other goals that's sort of part of the Brain Health Project, but is kind of like one of the outcomes that we're hoping to derive from this is what are markers of health, like physiological markers of brain health. Because right now, if you look at any markers are all about detecting disease or sickness or like early detection for that. But it's like, but what's a marker of just optimal brain health, right? Like, is it a amount like, we have VO2 max, we have like all these other things, but we don't really have one for brain. So is there something in your blood? Is there something, is it heart rate variability over time? Is it like, we don't know. So I think I'm really excited about the advancements in technology, the way that it's going to allow us to pull in just more real-time physiological data over periods of time to understand what are these markers of optimal health, especially because it seems like there's no ceiling on health. Like, it's like there's no point do you tap out where it's like you actually can't learn anymore, or you can't become better at this skill. There's physical limitations to, like, you actually can't run any faster, but people break records all the time, right? So I think when it comes to the brain, it's like such infinite possibilities. So I think to understand like what are the markers of those, and then how can we then use that information to then be better or strive for that. So then it's more about, okay, I can add in more of this to get more of there, as opposed to, oh, I need to do this to avoid, right, that sickness. It's kind of like flipping it.
Wow, that's really interesting. Like, yeah, like you might have like, yeah, like you said, the VO2 max is like, it's a great metric for like how healthy your heart is and maybe the lifespan of your heart and whatnot. But like, yeah, like you're saying we don't exactly know like what a great marker for brain health and brain longevity might be. And that's what you say that you're hoping to find. And that's truly amazing. And maybe if you find something, let me know, because I'm very curious. That seems really
whatever,
cool.
when we publish the paper or make that discovery, I'll come back on and we'll talk about it.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. And I guess a final question, what would you say to someone who's like, maybe they're in high school or they're not certain what they want to do, or what would you say to your past self? Like, do you have any advice for someone younger who's trying to determine where their path is going to be? Like, what would you say?
Try everything, like as much hands-on experience as you can get, and talk to people, like ask as many people as get in touch with people that do that thing that you think you're interested in, ask what they like about it, what they don't like about it, ask what's hard about it, kind of get an idea of the day-to-day nitty-gritty, because no one profession is all glamorous, right? There's always parts of things that aren't maybe not fun or we don't enjoy. But yeah, I think getting as broad of perspectives, and to not let that deter you, right? If you talk to someone that's like, like you, because you are very different than them. So to take it with kind of a grain of salt, but I think just as much exposure and experience as you can get to try those things is probably the best thing you could do. And I would say one thing I wish I did more of sooner was also to not be afraid to share about that learning process. I think people are really interested in knowing that. And that's something that I always felt like. So let's see, I finished my PhD 4 years ago. And so that time has flown, but I felt like, oh, I'm a student. I don't know anything. Like I don't have the credibility to like share this or whatever. And it's like, that's actually the most interesting time, is when you're in the process of learning it and you can kind of take people on that journey with you, or like let them into that. And so I think I would say, number one, with these platforms, like you don't have to wait until you're, have letters behind your name to be sharing information on that side of things. But I think, to just sort of have confidence in like, if you have, to not be, I think just like start sooner. Like if you love something, start it as soon as you can. Like there's no reason, like you don't have to wait. You don't have to graduate. You don't have to be some certain level, like just start now.
Yeah, I love that. That That's really great. Just start and like keep asking questions. It's like you said, it's like the people that succeed in life or the people that go far are the people who just are the most curious, who are willing to ask the most questions, willing to learn, willing to recognize that they don't know very much and that they want to know more. And like that I resonate with so much. And that's honestly why I started this thing. You know, I don't have any letters, but it's like, I just want to learn more,
Yes.
you know?
And
So,
not being afraid to fail. I think that's something that I'm so risk averse. I don't like failure. I want to know that this is going to succeed, and just being okay with doing it messy and imperfect and just starting. And part of that is like embracing like that sense of curiosity or feeling safe to be curious and go try things. It's like, yeah, knowing that like, okay, if I fail, what happens? I learned, I get valuable experience.
yeah, exactly. It's just the beauty of life. Fail, learn, grow. And, you know, like bringing it back to religion for a final time of like, you know, I'm scared to take this risk, but it's like, you know, if you believe that your life has a purpose, it's like, well, I'm going to get through this even if I do fail, and like it will be okay and whatnot. And so that's always a nice little helps with peace.
Yeah. Trusting that God's got a really good plan and he knows better than me. So
Yes. That's a great place to end. I really appreciate you coming
absolutely.
on.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.